We want to feel the sunshine, and we want to smell the flowers. We are sure that God has willed it, and we mean to have 8 hours. We're summoning our forces from the shipyard, shop, and mill. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. For generations, the holy grail of the workers' movement was for the 8-hour workday, representing a fair balance between the responsibilities of work and the possibilities of life. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. In the 1800s, people routinely worked 65-plus hour weeks just as a general rule, just to survive. This was widely seen by workers as a condition that robbed them of their life and wrecked their bodies prematurely. Why should only the wealthy or the hiring class get to feel the sunshine and smell the flowers? Surely that was the birthright of every person just by virtue of being a person. Surely we weren't intended for lives of ceaseless toil. Well, the work week fell from those 65-plus hours in the 1800s to an average of 43 hours in the 1970s. And this was the result of generations of dedicated labor activism, for one. The Fair Labor Standards Act enshrined the 8-hour workday in law in 1938, requiring overtime pay if employers went beyond that. The shortening of the work week is also the result of large gains in worker productivity. As workers became more productive and society gets wealthier, in theory, everyone can choose more leisure, right? If we're more productive, we can work less for the same result and have more time for ourselves. The great economist John Maynard Keynes, writing in 1930, famously predicted that because of gains in worker productivity, by 2030, the average person would work 15 hours a week. And Keynes wondered at the improvement in health, well-being, and culture that would result from this great boon of all of us having so much more time just to cultivate our humanity and enjoy the pleasures of life. Well, Keynes, it turns out, was wrong in two respects. First, he underpredicted how much more productive people would be. He thought people would be more productive. They are much more productive. The productivity of the American worker has gone up 400% just since 1950. Of course, the wealth created by that productivity has not, for the most part, gone to the worker. And about that work week, well, the average full-time employed worker works 47 hours today. 8 million Americans work 60 or more hours per week. That is for full-time employees, the kind who are often salaried and exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Salaried employees often suffer from a culture of overwork that demands very long hours in exchange for workplace opportunity. Ann Peterson, the author of Can't Even: How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, notes that this culture of overwork is severely aggravated by the recent invention of the virtual office, all those lovely tools on your smartphone, which demands that we bring our work home with us on our phones and be available 24/7. Bosses can send emails now at 10 p.m., and even if they don't expect an immediate answer, pro tip, they do, someone else is going to answer it anyway. And if that someone is not you, well, it's a competitive workplace, and there's only so many promotions to go around. Meanwhile, coworkers can see who is and isn't logging in on Slack or the other team platforms. Bosses can see that and take notice. It is becoming increasingly impossible for some American workers to detach from the office and leave their work at home. Instead, work bleeds into family time as a constant stress and distraction. But there's really a two-tiered system of American overwork, and it looks different for different people. That's the tier for salary workers, ever lengthening workdays and this demand of 24/7 availability. Wage workers often face a different problem. There are not enough work hours available for them, and the work hours they can get are erratic and unpredictable. Lower paid wage workers might be stringing together 2 or even 3 jobs, which individually do not provide survivable hours and benefits. This makes piecing together work almost another job just in itself. It takes a lot of time and stress to juggle multiple part-time jobs and make all of that work, and especially if you are a parent or a single mom and you have to add childcare to the mix, forget about it. Now, the two-tier system is the result of the logic of productivity. Susan Lambert, a professor of social work at the University of Chicago, writing in an op-ed for the New York Times, explains that professional workers have high fixed costs for their employers, right? Salaries that are not tied to the number of hours you work, health insurance. Since the cost of employment is fixed, they have incentive to get as many hours or as much productivity out of those workers as they possibly can, because they're paying the same anyway. Wage workers represent the opposite problem. Employers have an incentive to give them as few hours as possible for the amount of work, since the hours have a cost. So there's an incentive to keep the hours below the level where they would have to pay benefits, and there's incentive to keep staff as low as possible, and thus the rise of scientific, just-in-time workers' scheduling. Susan Lambert notes that rather than being long and relentless, work hours in hourly jobs, especially low-level ones, are often scarce, fluctuating, and unpredictable. Sales associates and restaurant workers might be scheduled for 7 hours one week and 32 the next. Hotel housekeepers might work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday one week, and then Sunday, Thursday, and Saturday the following week. Schedules are often posted just a few days in advance. There's a gendered component in this, she notes. Women in hourly jobs are likely to have less input than men in determining their work schedules, according to national surveys. Well, the result of this unpredictable scheduling is deeply inhumane. As economics journalist Bryce Covert points out, when you have to be constantly available, none of your time is really your own time. It is impossible to plan for your 8 hours of what you will when you don't know what your work week will look like until 2 days before. 16% of workers have schedules that fluctuate based on their employer's needs. It's about 1 in 6. And again, since these kinds of jobs often don't provide sufficient hours and benefits to survive, workers use what free time they do have to string together second and third jobs to make ends meet. And if that doesn't do it, they participate in the so-called gig economy as Uber drivers and delivery drivers and so on and so on. The gig economy has created a third kind of omnipresent overwork. The gig economy offered the promise of flexibility as freedom, right? To be an Uber driver, work when you want, as much as you want. It sounds super liberating, right? But the result has been different. As Ann Peterson notes in her book, Can't Even: How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, the result of the gig economy has been to monetize every waking hour of our lives. When every hour becomes a potential work hour, there is an incentive to never be off. Every hour spent on oneself becomes a lost wage. And if you are in the position of stringing together all these unlivable jobs, trying to feed your kids or provide them with opportunities, there is always an incentive to be gigging, to fill available hours driving Uber, or delivering takeout, doing online data entry, whatever thing that you can find. Because remember, you're trying to feed your kids. And the gig economy, Peterson notes, serves as kind of a social band-aid. It permits us to not notice how lousy and unsustainable so many jobs are by letting workers supplement those jobs with jobs that are not even jobs, where the workers are not considered employees and have very few rights and protections. Now, underlying all this overwork and underwork and piecework and gig work are two things. The first, as Colleen notes in her excellent reflection, is an American culture that valorizes work and productivity, that almost worships it. Benjamin Klein-Honeycutt, a researcher on work and free time at the University of Iowa, says Americans, quote, value work more than any other culture in the history of the world. Americans value work as an end in itself. We are all in as a culture on the idea that being productive is what makes us valuable as people and what gives life meaning. We let our work define us. We let our work define our value. We let our work, as Colleen notes, define our social status. Now, it's true that there is satisfaction in hard work well done, and it is true that work can be a calling, can be creative and engaging, can make the world a better place, can be joyful, can make us feel alive. Work has dignity and importance, and Americans sure do take it to the next level. Work is a thing. It is not the only thing. Now, the other thing underlying all this overwork and bad work conditions and skewed work-life balance is vulnerability. Americans have very little savings overall, and the social safety net is practically non-existent. Remember how all those productivity gains didn't necessarily land in the workers' pockets or the workers' savings. This is a culture of make it on your own through, what's that thing we love again? Oh yes, hard work. Make it on your own through hard work, or else. It's a vulnerable position to be in. The middle class are afraid of dropping out of the middle class, or worse, of their children dropping out of the middle class, and the poor are just struggling to get by. It is very hard to say no to inhumane working conditions, to the long hours, to the unpredictable hours, to the insufficient hours, if you're vulnerable, if you cannot afford to go without work for even a little while. Now, the Fair Labor Standards Act was supposed to prevent these kinds of abuses. Susan Lambert argues we need two changes to the Fair Labor Standards Act to address these modern work conditions, these modern work abuses. We need a minimum number of guaranteed hours per week to prevent wage workers from having to scramble to put together a livable paycheck. And she says we need overtime pay for salaried professionals to discourage the 60-hour white-collar work week. Other economists are making the case that businesses should adopt a shorter work week just out of their own self-interest. Burnout is a real problem. There is plenty of evidence that overwork doesn't actually work. People are less productive when they work too many hours, when they are stressed out, when they are multitasking, when they are sleep deprived, when they are joy deprived. Stressed out workers are more distracted, more accident prone, they make mistakes, they're more likely to miss shifts or get sick. Spending less time working could actually make us better workers as well as healthier human beings. And some businesses and some governments are trying on this idea. Sweden ran a 2-year experiment with nurses working 6-hour days or a 30-hour 5-day work week. The nurses reported being happier and healthier. There was a cost, though, as more nurses had to be hired to cover the shifts. NPR reports that in a recent experiment, Microsoft Japan cut the work week for their workers to 4 days with no drop in pay. They just said, don't come in on Friday. We'll pay you the same. Productivity shot up 40%. Microsoft Japan says this is just an experiment, but other companies are making similar experiments with some promising results. Times reports a firm in New Zealand ran the same experiment, 4 days, same pay, and the results were so good they are making the change permanent. These shorter work weeks also potentially create a greener economy with 20% less electricity used in the office, fewer cars on the road commuting to work, less paper printed, and on and on. But even if the 4-day work week has good business potential and is what workers want, and surveys show it is the preferred choice by most workers, we can't expect this to just happen. Neeraj Koshi, a business reporter at the New York Times, calls the 4-day work week the flying car of labor. It's been talked about for decades. Everyone assumes that it is just right around the corner, and yet it never happens. Choksi cites structural challenges, a lack of trust between employers and workers, simple inertia, habit, and that cultural valorizing of work, our American cult of productivity. Now, against the cult of productivity, author and artist Jenny Odell makes the case for the virtue of doing nothing. In her book, How to Do Nothing, Odell argues that time spent doing nothing meaning time not monetized or commercialized or optimized is essential for the soul. It is essential for culture. It allows for new insights and new perspectives to emerge. It makes space for unforced, unhurried conversations and real human connections. But she notes that even in pointing these things out, how essential time doing nothing is, it takes us back to a mindset where we have to justify the decision to do nothing as useful. We're still talking about what's useful, and she wants to bring us back to this ideal of 8 hours of what we will, meaning 8 hours to do whatever we will, even if it is not useful, even if it has no justification, even if it is nothing. Americans are so enamored of the cult of productivity that we even try to make our free time more efficient and more productive. We optimize it with life hacks. And in part, this is an attempt to squeeze more free time out of our rapidly vanishing allotment, right? It's a response to our skewed work-life balance. The idea is, if we were really good at managing our lives, good at it, if we became expert jugglers and schedulers and 20-minute meal makers and bedtime routine setters and listen to our podcasts while on the treadmill to save time and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we could somehow have more time for our life without actually working less. And Jenny Odell says, stop it, just stop it. Free time means free time. Time that does not have to be justified, time that does not have to be useful and optimized, time where we do what we want. Time where we truly are free. She says this is something that should be every person's birthright. But as Dr. King said, justice does not just roll in on the wheels of inevitability. To shift the culture of overwork and underwork towards something like just and humane work, this will require, unfortunately, work. It will require at least paying attention, making different choices where possible, leveraging our privilege where we have it, recognizing that many workers do not, and advocating in all the ways available to us. And we are at this moment of great societal upheaval around work structures where everything has been scrambled by COVID, and there's a real possibility in this moment, if we pay attention and we make different choices and we advocate. Now, many businesses and corporations will try to reestablish the old norms as quickly as possible, not because they're villains, but because this is what they know and this is what they think is necessary. But other businesses are taking this time to experiment. Workers, especially the young, seem to be leveraging their unique power born of this labor shortage by refusing to return to those exploitive work conditions. And so this is a generational opportunity to reimagine what we want work to be and to push for something better. Unitarian Universalism lifts up the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Work is necessary. Work is sometimes a joy, but work does not define our value. Work is not how we justify our worth. Productivity is not the rent we pay for our right to be, and our usefulness is not how we purchase the right to take up space. We have inherent worth. We are inherently worthy of love just by being. We are, each of us, enough. Let us not fear as a faith community to be a voice in this great conversation we are having. Let us lift up our value that says you are enough. And let us do our part to dismantle the cult of productivity and offer in its place a vision that is balanced, creative, and humane. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. Blessed be, and amen.